Amanda. Um, so great. We are so lucky to have our speakers today, Dr. Jim McDonald and Mike Houston. And we will have a little bit of time after each speaker and for questions, and then have a more detailed Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. James McDonald, who has informed me that I can call him Jim. And he is a research professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Maryland. He teaches courses on commodity markets and food and agricultural policy. His research focuses mainly on competition, technology adoption, and productivity growth in the food and agricultural industries. But prior to joining the university, Jim has for 2 decades chief roles in the structure, technology, and productivity branch at the USDA's Economic Research Service. So we're very, very delighted to hear his take on tariffs. So thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Lorian. Let me bring some slides up. Okay, this should work. Okay, I'm going to give you a big picture story of what we expect to happen as a result of tariffs over the next year. I can get it. Let me work on getting it up and down on how this is going to advance. Okay, first, what food and ag products are imported? I've sorted into these several categories, right? Things that we don't produce, like coffee, tea, cocoa, bananas, pineapples, those are all going to go up a lot in price. Things that we don't produce year-round, like berries in the winter, fresh fruits and vegetables in the winter. Things that we produce, but we produce sort of competing varieties of things that we also import. Cheese, booze, sugar and olive oil, tomatoes, lean beef. We import a lot of all of those things. And then as an aside, I'm not going to talk much about them today, but farm inputs, fertilizers in particular, steel and aluminum, and hence they go into farm structures and equipment. Materials. I was on a panel last week with someone who is a fruit and vegetable grower in Upper Marlboro, and I hadn't thought of this. She said she buys a lot of gloves for her employees. Almost all gloves are imported. So those are going up quite a bit in price. And in general, just to keep in the back of your mind, we almost all shoes and clothing in the United States are imported, and they're imported from countries that are going to face relatively high tariffs, poor countries generally. We can expect those prices to be over the next year rising by 35 to 40%, given the tariffs that are imposed. That's a lot more than what I expect to happen to food prices. That's sort of the outer edge. Those are the things that are going to be most strongly affected. Let me see if I can scroll down. I want to talk about likely tariff impacts on prices. And what you have to keep in mind as a starting point is just 2 big facts. And here I'm going to be talking about prices across the economy. I'll come back to mention food in a bit. The first important fact is imports account for about 14% of US GDP, that is of national economic spending. And the second big fact is the average tariff. Now, I've written this as of now because I wrote this thing last week. So as of last week, the average tariff for products imported into the United States was a shade over 20%, an enormous increase from where they stood last year and through the last 30 to 40 years. Last year, the average was 1.6%. Now, we then reached an agreement with the European Union that's 15%. That's going to pull this average down slightly, but then it's going to change again next week. So let me stick with 20.2% average tariff on 14% of US GDP. If tariffs get fully passed through to prices, and I believe that is the best starting point for thinking about this, then you'd expect the change in prices across the economy to be that 14% share of imports times a 20% tariff or a 2.8% increase in prices. Now, that's a starting point. What's going to cover variation from that starting point are a lot of things, but two big things. One is some domestic prices will also rise because of tariffs. In an important sense, that's the point of tariffs. We are imposing tariffs, for example, on Mexican tomatoes so that we can allow Florida tomato growers to raise their prices. We're imposing tariffs on foreign steel so that U.S. steel makers can get higher prices. So we will also expect some domestic production to rise in price because of the tariff. There is something else that kind of moves you down a bit too. That is, the tariffs are really about prices at the border. So in a sense, wholesale prices. When those tomatoes from Mexico come into the United States, there are more costs that are borne shipping them to the retailer, cooling and costs at the retailer. Those aren't changing because of tariffs. It's the wholesale price that's going up. The retail price will go up, but by less in percentage terms. So we've got a couple of important elements that could lead to either more or less than a 2.8% increase. So let me go with a range. I think a likely impact is over the next year is a 2 to 4% increase in consumer prices, bracketing that number I started with at 2.8%. And I'll add to that, that's for the overall economy. Food price inflation, technically the food at home consumer price index, so what you buy in the grocery store, generally very closely matches overall inflation. So in my view, the inflation for food prices will also be that range that I'm talking about, with the exceptions of the stuff we import a lot of. That'll go up a lot. Okay, let me drop it down one more slide. I just said, whoops, this is, okay. I'm having a little trouble advancing things here. I said 2.8% is going to be the impact. How's that going to play out? The first thing to think about is it's going to play out with a lag. Imports take time to arrive at U.S. ports. They take time to go to U.S. inventories and stores. If it's a retail branded product, the firm changes price maybe twice a year, so you lag in making the actual price change. And actual tariffs are so uncertain and change so much that some firms are reluctant as well to immediately change prices because of tariffs. But ultimately, prices are going to go up because of the tariffs. Now, it's going to get added to existing inflation. U.S. inflation has been proceeding at an annual rate of 2 to 3% per year. The target for the Federal Reserve is 2% to drive it down. We have not been able to reach that. Overall inflation and inflation for consumer prices has remained stubbornly in the range of around 2.5%, but call it 2 to 3. So when I say that tariffs will add a range of 2 to 4% to overall inflation, I'm going to say 2 to 4% added to the 2 to 3% range that we have been under in recent years. So by May 2026, what I expect that we'll see is the consumer price index at that time will be about a little over 5% above its value from this past May. And the range is, it could be 4 to 7% above. That is, including both the tariff impact and underlying inflation. Now, the bold at the bottom, I think inflation is unlikely to continue to rise after that. So I think we're going to reach a peak a year out. Then prices won't go down, but the rate of inflation will go back down towards that underlying trend of 2 to 2.5%. Notice down there in the bold, I start using words like unlikely and likely. that actually points to some very tricky things in monetary policy. I'm not going to talk about them now. If you want, I can go into it later. But I think it's still fair to say that the most likely impact of tariffs is an increase in inflation that lasts, over the year, and then we fall back to the underlying rate of inflation that we've had for a while. Okay. Um, but although almost all the conversation is about prices, economists think there's a much more serious threat. That conversation goes on almost entirely among economists. And the issue here is that tariffs don't just reduce imports because of higher prices. They also reduce exports. That is what we see in economic theory and in all empirical work. Tariffs affect imports and exports. The reason they affect exports is the three bullets I lay out at the top here. First, half of what we import are intermediate goods like aluminum, steel, fertilizers. Tariffs therefore raise the costs and prices for exporting firms. Those firms will find that their products are now higher priced in international markets and will sell less of them in international markets. Secondly, to the extent that tariffs reduce imports, they will raise the value of the dollar. They will do so because we are offering fewer dollars in international exchange markets, and we're offering to buy fewer foreign currencies. That'll drive up the value of the dollar, which also makes exports more expensive and will reduce our export flows. Finally, if there's retaliation, that will also reduce U.S. exports. The net effect of all that is that what high tariffs do is shift employment and production out of exporting industries and into importing industries. Another way of putting it is we shifted out of industries with high productivity growth, selling things that people want to buy from us, into industries with low productivity growth, selling things that people outside the United States don't want to buy from us. The net effect of that is that US productivity and GDP, economic growth, will be lower. At the present target for tariffs, the best estimates I see is that we would expect in the long run GDP growth to fall by 0.5 percentage point per year. Over a period of years, that gets to be a very big number. Just as an example, since 2000 through 2024, average annual GDP growth in the United States, adjusted for inflation, so that is the physical value of what we produce, grew at about 2.1% a year. I would expect tariffs to cut that growth in the future to 1.6%. That would be a 0.5 percentage point cut. If over the last 25 years, our GDP had grown by 1.6 instead of 2.1%, today our incomes would be about 13 to 14% lower than they actually are. So that is a big number. Multiply it by 330 million people, and that's a really big number. So to economists, the bigger problem, I should say, is actually impact on economic growth rather than the impact on prices. Okay, last point. I've treated tariffs here in isolation, but of course there's other things going on. The uncertainty itself is extreme here. We don't know from week to week what tariffs are. Nobody seems to know exactly precisely which products are tariffed at what. We don't know really across countries, or it changes a lot. Firms find it very difficult. In fact, they will not invest in new plants, equipment, facilities with this extreme level of tariff uncertainty. That itself will have a likely impact on productivity and on growth. Also related to this are immigration and deportations. U.S. labor force growth is slowing sharply, sort of down to zero and likely to go negative. Immigrant employment is concentrated in a relatively small number of sectors: fruits and vegetables, food processing, residential construction and services, lodging, home health care, nursing homes. In those areas, we should expect to see some noticeable impacts ultimately on output, that is, how much we produce. Think of it as emptier shelves, and some noticeable impacts potentially from that route on prices. So I want to emphasize here, what I've talked about so far is just straight tariffs, not the added impact of these other elements. Okay. If I can get this advanced a bit, there we go. Conclusions. Okay, tariffs are going to raise consumer prices. Overall, I expect CPI inflation next year of 4 to 7%. That's again due to tariffs added to underlying inflation. Higher increases for those products we import a lot of, listed here. And at the extreme, really big increases, 35 to 40% for shoes and clothing. The other big underlying message I want to emphasize again is tariffs reduce both imports and exports and ultimately reduce productivity and income growth. That's a big challenge for the future. So let me get out of sharing, and that's what I have.
Thank you so much, Jim. Really appreciate that very overarching look at what's going on with tariffs. We have time for some questions for Jim. Feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat if you prefer. I have just, okay, sorry. I have a little question, but I will save it. Lindsay, would you go ahead and ask your question?
Thanks, Lorianne, and thanks, Jim. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Well, this is a very sobering picture, and I wondered, from a policy standpoint, do you think there's anything that states should be thinking about or doing differently that might potentially buffer some of these impacts? Broadly speaking, but then, particularly for folks like us who want to see more investment in our food and agriculture, regional economy, and improved food access at affordable prices?
Well, look, this will fall more heavily, tariffs on low-income households. What we're tariffing here are goods, physical things, not services. Low-income households spend higher shares of their income on goods than on services. Higher income households spend more on services. So as a result, the incidence of the tariffs, if you think of them as a tax, they will fall more heavily on low-income households. And for food products, of course, it holds the same way. Low-income households spend much more of their income on food than on other products. And they actually spend a considerable amount on shoes and clothing. Those are sort of basic things. So I expect this is going to fall more heavily on low-income households. And I think that to my view, the immediate concern for local and state governments would be, what can we do with our programs to ensure some buffer to lower income households who will be hit harder by this?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much, Jim. Might I just ask a question about the labor force? Because one of the things I've been sort of really concerned about is our shrinking labor force in the food system because of just deportations and immigration. Yeah. And I'm wondering if you have any sort of, seen any recent, kind of analyses of how that's going to impact, and where do you go for information on kind of forecasts of what these deportations are going to mean for the economy?
I'd start with, just if I'm telling you where to go, I'd start with someone like Diane Clemens at Montana State, who came out of the whole California group of agricultural economists who work because it's California on a lot of ag labor issues. And I'd start with her and then let her tell you who else to talk to would be my quick answer. The long term issue here, because California's faced labor stresses for many years, is that you do see a continuing shift towards automation. And you'll certainly see more and more of that, I think, in the future. Historically, we've also seen a shift, often by California farming organizations, of production to Mexico. Tariffs are going to cut off some of that if they remain in place. So that's not going to be an out. I think you will see, if these hold, fairly substantial long-term impacts on fresh fruit and vegetable prices. I had claimed in a presentation yesterday that would benefit greenhouse producers of fresh fruits and vegetables on the East Coast. And I had an actual producer in the audience, so that was a mistake. No, he agreed that his prices were going to get better, but also pointed out he imports a lot of peat, a lot of gloves, and a lot of aluminum for his structures. And all of those were going to go up quite a bit in price. So he didn't expect to be particularly advantaged by this at all.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Yeah, my own thought is, especially with greenhouses in particular, it's so equipment heavy, and just with the labor pinch, may have some issues more for our small and mid-sized farms than the large farms that can more easily shift to automation.
Yeah, I think larger farms are more heavily automated. There is a steady shift anyway towards larger farms, and to be honest with you, I expect that to continue, and for tariffs to probably accelerate that shift.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from Amanda Cather. It says, I'm wondering about how to support farmers in the exporting industries to transition if they are able.
You know, I'll be mean about it. These are wealthy people. I mean, what we export a lot of is grains and oil seeds, meat and dairy products. I'd be much more concerned about food price impacts on low-income households. I think there will be reduced export opportunities for some typically large-scale farms. They are experienced, capable businessmen. I would not spend a lot of time directing public money towards them. They should be certainly capable of making adjustments on their own. And they start with a lot of land that's worth a great deal of money. They are, by and large, not poor people at all.
Right. And I think, Jim, that's a good point I've always noticed there's a huge difference and divide in supporting farmers that are commodity farmers for export versus small and mid-sized farms that are, the type that engage in our local food systems. So
yeah, I like talking to each group, but they are distinctly different groups.
Right. Absolutely. Well, thank you. We will have more time for questions and general discussion at the end, but we are very lucky to be joined by Mike Houston, General Manager at the Takoma Park Silver Spring Food Co-op. And just really looking forward to hearing his view. He, prior to starting his general managing at the Takoma Park Silver Spring Food Co-op in 2018, he already was involved in purchasing decisions through Dawson's Market and other retail purchasing roles. And so, but currently his role at the Takoma Park Silver Springs Co-op involves purchasing. It involves, the management of the co-op, strategic planning for the direction of the co-op, involves leading at the team there at the co-op, and financial forecasting and data analysis of what's going on there with the co-op. So I'm just really excited. He's involved in it every day with his purchasing decisions and what to stock on the shelves. So, all right, let me introduce Mike Houston, and I'll go ahead and share your slides.
Awesome, fantastic. Yeah, happy to be here, and think Jim set the table very well for coming down to some more granular level. As you will see from my first slide when it loads, I'm coming to this with an angle, but um, so next slide, Lorian. Starting big picture, this is what Jim was referencing. This is food inflation. So the percentage of food inflation. It's important for what I want to talk about today to go backwards a little bit for the food inflation that we've already experienced. So it was actually not the beginning of COVID, but really the beginning of 2021, and especially 22 and 23, when we started to see a huge increase in food inflation. Obviously, COVID affected that, but we also had the Ukraine war. The beginning of that conflict had gigantic effects on fuel and on wheats and grain. We had the avian flu that affected egg prices. We had climate disasters. There was one in Madagascar that affected vanilla prices dramatically. And then we also have consolidation throughout the food industry, which I'll talk about. So that's what the percentage looked like, and then you see the percentage of food inflation coming down in 2024. Now the next slide, you'll see what that looks like in terms of real price. So this is just one example. The Washington Post has a great thing where they're tracking food inflation. So this example is from fast food, but it's informative, just looking at that 2022 to 2023 range. And if you drill down on any individual product, you'll see sort of that same thing where you have a dramatic increase in the rate of the cost going up on those individual items. And then as the inflation came down, the percentage of increase, sort of levels off there as we come to 2025. But in an absolute sense, prices, still are rising. We went through about a decade's worth of typical food inflation in the 2 years in 2022 and 2023. So next slide. So this is a bigger picture view where you can see that even more dramatically. You see very low, rates of inflation in food costs, in the 50s, 60s. There's a little bit of inflation in the 70s, obviously, but even that is interesting to look at compared to 2022. But I wanted to drill down on two specific points in time. So the financial crisis in 2008, which is that yellow arrow, you can see that we experienced food inflation, that value going up there. And then the red arrow, you see 2022 and 2023 and that dramatic food inflation. So then on the next slide, we're going to look at some behavioral changes or the lack of behavioral changes. So the yellow arrow again shows that 2008 financial crisis. So again, we had a period there of food inflation. People did what they have typically done before, which is spend less on food. Where that largely comes from is trading down, buying less things for special events, not going out to eat as much. But in real dollars, the sales went down in 2008. Now, what's interesting in 2022 and 2023, again, in that period of extreme food inflation that we just lived through, is we don't see that same pattern. The sales, this is retail food sales, went up during that period. So, for a number of reasons that those food costs went up, some of them, real inputs, and we certainly know, that there were some people taking advantage of, stories around inflation, increasing prices more than they needed to be increased. the overall, those folks were not paying a price. People were still willing to pay, whether, they thought that that's what it costs, whether those were real inputs with prices going up. We did not see those sales fall. We in fact saw them go up dramatically. So then on the next slide, we will also look at profits for food. So this is non-durable good manufacturing industries. So this is food, retail, food manufacturers, oil, gas, petrol is in here, cleaning products. But this is just a look at profits. And so again, you can see in that 2022, 2023 range, when those costs went up dramatically, manufacturers of these goods did very well. That would seem to tell you that prices were increasing more than costs were increasing. But again, they were not seeing the same pressure to drop their prices, both from consolidation within some of these industries and from consumers just being willing to pay the prices that they were seeing. All right, next slide, please. So that's just some table setting for how we are coming in to these 2025 tariffs. So I think everyone remembers these charts that were released on April 2nd of 2025, showing the formula the administration was using in order to calculate what they were calling reciprocal tariffs on countries around the world. You can go to the next slide, Lorian. Those tariffs ranged from about 10% to 49% on all foreign goods. These reciprocal tariffs were originally slated to go into effect on April 5th. They've been pushed back. Some of them have gone into effect. Some of them are slated to go into effect in 2 days. They have been pushed back several times. But since April 5th, there has been a blanket 10% tariff in effect. There has been increased tariffs, as Jim mentioned, on certain countries, certain regions, Europe, China. There's the 25% tariff on imported steel and aluminum that we talked about, how that affects the food industry both directly and indirectly. There are some agricultural products from Mexico and Canada that are exempt from tariffs under the existing trade agreement, but there has not been a new agreement that the administration said it was seeking. So I won't drill down on stuff from Mexico and Canada. But on the next slide, I believe I have an example. All right. So let's look at a real example here. So this is bananas here at the co-op. So on the left, January of 2025, what we're paying, and on the right, July of 2025, after those 10% tariffs had gone into effect. So both of these boxes, 40-pound box of bananas, both from Ecuador. So in January, we paid $28.63. And in July, we paid $30.17. So my cost per pound went from 71 cents a pound up to 75 cents a pound. So a little over a 5% increase there. The retail that I have those organic Ecuadorian bananas at in January was 99 cents a pound, and today is still 99 cents a pound. So I was making a 28% margin in January. Now, from not raising that price, I'm making a 24% margin. Just a fun fact about grocery stores, but bananas are almost always the top selling item by by pound in a grocery store. The apples all have different SKUs, and so those don't get lumped together. So you'll always see bananas at the very top of your sales report. So taking a margin hit on that is not insignificant. So on the next slide, So if I wanted to maintain my 28% margin that I had back in January from that sales increase, from that cost increase, I would have to retail those bananas at $1.04. But if you have ever worked at a, especially retail grocery store, you know that we don't price things at 104. So if your margin calculation came out to 104, you would round up to the next nine, it would be the typical practice. So you would price them at 109. But that is also a no-no in retail pricing. We don't price things at 109. You either stick at 99 or you go up to the next nine, which is 119. So on the next slide, I happen to be at a national discount store that sells groceries and snapped a picture of this well before I was putting this presentation together because the price sort of shocked me a little that they were selling their organic bananas 2 pounds for $2.39. That struck me as odd because that is more than the 99 cent per pound that we're selling them here at the co-op, and this is a gigantic retailer. And you can see there that equates to the 119 per pound that I came to on the last slide. So if you go forward one more slide. So here at the co-op, choosing to not pass along that 5% increase in our banana costs and take them down to a 24% margin, we're selling them at 99 cents a pound. Thank you. That other discount grocer has gone up to 119 a pound. And if you assume that their costs are similar to ours, they are now making well above that 28%. They're making a 37% margin on one of their largest sellers. So obviously, each individual store is figuring out how to deal with these things in real time. But I thought that was a helpful example of of how it looks like. All right, we can go to the next slide. There is an economic concept called the waterbed effect. You see this a lot in wholesale pricing, that if Whole Foods negotiates, really hammers the wholesaler and says, we want these beans to be, we want to buy them at 49 cents a can so that we can sell them at 99 cents a can. They have huge volume, they have the leverage, they negotiate that. The wholesaler still has a margin that they need to make on that product overall, and so they will pass along a higher cost to smaller accounts, to people that don't have the leverage that big retailers have to negotiate that, and that is known as the waterbed effect, pressing down in one place and it just gets made up for somewhere else. So there are the direct price increases. Again, bananas is very simple. That 10% discount. Obviously, not all of that 10% tariff was being passed on to us as a retailer. Likely, the farmers ate a couple percentage points. The distributor ate a couple percentage points, and when it got to me, it was a little over a 5% increase. But there are indirect costs that are increasing as well as a result of these tariffs. So as Jim referenced, the unknown is very bad for business planning. People, brewers are using cash to try and buy up aluminum cans, cash that they could be using for other investments or for their workforce, or for any kind of business planning, facility investments. People just don't know whether they can expand, whether they can invest in things. And so, all of these on again, on off again tariffs, and the speed with which things are changing is really bad for long-term business planning. We already talked a little bit about it, but labor issues caused by ice raids, What that could mean for, individual large-scale farms is, if some of their workforce is getting swept up in these ice raids, the agricultural products do not wait a couple days. When things are ready to be harvested, they're ready to be harvested. And so losses, from the instability caused by those raids in the workforce, is likely to be passed on in other places. So for example, if your lettuce fields, if you lose a huge amount of lettuce crops, due to, not having enough workers to pick the lettuce, but you also grow blueberries, you can pass those costs along on other products, elsewhere in your company. And then there's also the effect of people onshoring their business in name only. So being headquartered in another country, and finding it advantageous to onshore to the U.S. But that comes with additional costs, and with changes to their business model. So all of these can pass along indirect costs, as opposed to what we see, in a straightforward fashion in the banana example. So next slide. And as Jim said, the full effect of these tariffs is really yet to be seen. There are, again, additional tariffs that are supposed to take effect on August 1st. I couldn't tell you sitting here today whether they will or they won't, whether they'll be pushed back again. But that is slated at least. Those steel and aluminum, especially aluminum, affecting packaging, plastic packaging. I just had a farmer in here yesterday talking about cost increases, for the plastic packaging for his grape tomatoes. That is fairly dramatic when he's looking across, all of his packaging costs. Um, I was at a conference a few months back before the tariffs took effect, but a national dairy brand was there, and their cows are all inside of the U.S. or in upstate New York, and the Northeast, but their largest cost input is feed that they import from Canada, that is subject to the tariffs. So that's another example where, that yogurt brand, you're not going to see a direct 10% increase in the cost of their yogurt. What you're likely to see is 6 or 8 months from now, when things have worked their way through the system and they're paying those higher costs, on those inputs, you're going to see, 5%, 6% increase, in their retail or in their wholesale costs at least, that's likely to be passed on by retailers. Um, so, these things, uh, are not happening in real time. People are hearing about the tariffs, but some of the agricultural products are happening quickly. Coffee is happening quickly. Some of the other things are going to take time. There is a long horizon for food pricing. Even for a small retailer like us at the co-op, we have some national deals locked in for the year. We have contracts that protect that pricing. Um, so, whenever those contracts expire, for us, for national brands, people who had, an increase in their cost inputs will then raise their prices, going into their next financial year. So, we will be dealing with the effects even of what we've already seen in terms of cost increases, for big national brands and, for packaged goods for a long time, certainly for the next couple years. Um, and then yes, I think I have one more slide. As I stated at the beginning, opportunistic pricing abounds. There's an established cover story, that is very well known by people. People just broadly, have heard about food inflation and tariffs and expect to pay more for things. As I, sort of laid out at the beginning, broadly speaking, companies are not paying a price for their cost increases, whether those cost increases are based on real inputs or not. They are not seeing a decline in sales, based on increasing their prices that you would typically see in retail grocery. There's also consolidation happening. So one of the biggest things that used to keep food prices in check is competition. If Purdue and Tyson, were going to raise their prices, and there was another, large chicken company, they, usually you want to be within about 10% of your competition. So there would only be so much that they could raise their prices. The fewer large national brands that are controlling any given product, Smithfield with pork, the fewer brands you're dealing with, the less competition there is, and so people can raise their prices and not feel like they're going to lose sales, which also sort of leads to what we talked about at the beginning with the trading down. There just is not as much trading down available now as there was in 2008, because pricing all across the grocery sector has gone up. And again, that opportunistic pricing can happen at a lot of different places in the food chain. There's the farms slash manufacturers, there are the consolidators, there's the wholesalers, and there's the retailers. So if everyone along the way is adding a couple more percents, instead of eating a couple more percentage points, then you really can see those costs increase, by the time they get to end users shopping in the grocery store. Okay, and now I think I have just one more slide. So what can you do? Hopefully a few helpful things, but Google is your friend. I do literally sometimes walk around and look at our prices in the co-op and literally just Google that product. And you can see, through Google Shopping, what it's being sold for broadly. So, that is at least one thing that you can see, if the retailer that you're shopping at has something way out of line from other retailers, any sort of national product will pop up there and give you, 5 or 6 different choices of what it's being sold for. I would say if it seems too expensive, don't buy it. Again, these large scale companies are responding to how the market is treating them. If people are willing to pay these prices, they have absolutely no incentive to lower their prices. So I would say trust your instincts there. If something seems way out of whack, don't buy it. Shop places that you can trust. I will always put a plug in for shopping at independent stores, shopping at co-ops, shopping for people that are not publicly traded, and both of those are ways to say, vote with your wallet. Look at the kinds of retailers and wholesalers that you're supporting, and try and support folks that are doing things the right way. So. No, I talked for a long time. Happy to field any questions.
And I'm just stopping the share here. Thank you so much, Mike, for a very thorough look at what you've been going through at the co-op and all those examples.
Yeah, happy to.
Great. Questions for Mike? In the interest of time, just noticing that we have a few more minutes for questions, but one thing that we can do while we ask questions is I would love to ask if you all have any resources to share out in terms of your own, just where you've been looking for prices, where you've been looking for tariff information, and where you're even able to find the most recent news on tariffs. And I'll go ahead and start. I was going to share out a basically trade compliance hub that's put out by these lawyers. It's not like it's a completely random legal company for me, Reed Smith. But they have a tariff tracker that is insanely helpful and comprehensive that goes through all the tariffs and announcements that have been done since basically what they call Trump 2.0. So I'll go ahead and share that. And I would ask if you all have anywhere that you're looking or any recommendations. The Food Council is trying to put together just a really good set of notes and information for people to share out after this meeting.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find that Washington Post tracker while we're talking. That's helpful. I get a whole slate of industry things in my inbox every morning. Grocery Dive is great. Um, but yeah, I mean, here it's really just seeing the cost increases that we're getting from wholesalers and checking invoices and everything. And we talk about it at every manager meeting. So that's, I guess, a little more on the ground.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. And Jim.
Thanks. Just one on a source. For thinking about broad price and macroeconomic impacts of tariffs, I use the Yale Budget Lab, set up in the last year, a group of very good macroeconomists who have been spending a lot of time modeling likely tariff impacts. So they're a good, quick source. I also want to just add something to what Mike said, Mike's observation on bananas. It turns out Bureau of Labor Statistics collects as part of the Consumer Price Index a vast number of banana quotes. And every month they post the average price of conventional bananas across US supermarkets that are surveyed for the CPI. So I went and looked it up while Mike was talking. And it turns out the average retail price of conventional bananas rose by 3.5 cents a pound between February and June, about 6% in 4 months. And as a margin is kind of consistent with the increase in costs at wholesale prices that Mike is facing. So this looks sort of, well, consistent between conventional and organic.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
Lorian, I know we don't have a ton of time left, but I did see there was one question in the chat that hadn't been addressed from earlier from Lindsay, just in terms of supporting small and mid-sized farmers in the Mid-Atlantic. Are there any tactical responses that you'd suggest to be explored to try to better control imported input costs? Sorry, there's more. Is understanding and possibly boosting cooperative purchasing an avenue to be considered?
Well, there is a long-term movement, in USDA to work on cooperative, and not in USDA, in U.S. agriculture, in various categories to work on cooperative purchasing. It's tricky. Some forms of co-ops work a lot better than others. And some of those forms have actually been very successful in recent years. I particularly point over the last 20 years to wheat growers for pasta, who have a very effective cooperative organization, both for buying inputs and for selling. The first part of it, what do you do? Boy, you caught me unprepared. So I'm not going to jump in with an off the top of my head thought that I don't think is going to be that helpful.
And let's see, Lori Savage comments that inputs have been absolutely killing us the past several years. And that's from Savage Acres and Brown Cow Creamery. For fertilizer, etc. I told my husband no more planting commodity corn and soy because we are literally in the hole after growing.
I don't want to. I'll get slightly optimistic here. There are new products released in recent years for biofertilizers. Soil microbes that have been engineered and created as seed treatments that more effectively pull nitrogen out of the air and reduce your need for commercial nitrogen. They can reduce that need by 30 to 40%. They have been used in, I think, about 10%, 15 million acres, about 10% of the target crops in the country. So it's very promising. I would take a look, not guaranteeing, but I would take a look at things like that if I was worried about fertilizer costs. And of course, as you kind of indicated, corn takes a lot of fertilizer. So another response is to think about crop mix.
Good suggestions. So I know we're at time, but this is such a rich discussion. Does anybody have any last questions? Well, I have personally just plenty of questions, but I know we can save them for later. And we are going to go ahead and put together resources that were shared here, plus a few more resources that we have, and send them out. Or continuing information about tariffs and what's going on with the local food economy. And just thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Jim McDonald, Mike Houston, for sharing your expertise and your time. This has been so informative and helpful. Again, as you close the window for the call, a survey will pop up. Please complete the survey, I beg of you, so that we can get your responses. And just thank you so much. Appreciate you all, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Lorian. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you.